The warm hum of conversation filled Bella Cucina, a popular upscale restaurant known for its exquisite Italian cuisine and elegant atmosphere. On this bustling evening, the dining room shimmered with ambient lighting, clinking wine glasses, and the comforting aroma of fresh herbs and roasted garlic. Amidst the crowd, a group of black women and their children entered, their eyes gleaming with excitement and warmth. The hostess greeted them warmly, but the moment their assigned waiter, David, approached, the air shifted. His eyes flickered with disdain as he offered a forced smile, masking a deeper bias. Despite the women's cheerful demeanor and polite requests, David's responses were curt, his tone condescending. Little did he know, the woman leading the group, dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, was not just any guest. Beneath her kind exterior lay a powerful connection to the very foundation of this establishment. In the next hour, an uncomfortable truth would unravel, forcing David to confront his prejudices in the most public of settings. David, a mid-30s waiter with a meticulous appearance, stands by the service station, his eyes fixed on Amelia and her group. His jaw tightens as he taps his pen against a notepad, irritation flashing across his face. He mutters under his breath, barely audible, but the disdain is clear. Maria, a fellow server with a warm and empathetic demeanor, notices his reaction and approaches him, balancing a tray of glasses. "What's with the face? You've been scowling since they walked in," she asks, her tone both curious and concerned. David forces a tight smile, more grimace than greeting. "Nothing," he replies. "Just didn't expect that kind of crowd tonight." Maria raises an eyebrow, unimpressed by his veiled comment. "Seriously? They're here to eat, just like everyone else," she counters, her voice steady but laced with disappointment. David shrugs, his indifference palpable. "Yeah, sure. But you know how it goes. They'll be demanding, loud." His voice trails off as Maria cuts in sharply. Don't go there. You don't even know them." Her words linger, a subtle warning. David brushes it off, his confidence unwavering. "I've seen it before. Let's just say, I've got a feeling this table's going to be a headache," he says, his tone casual but loaded with prejudice. Maria exhales, shaking her head in frustration. "Maybe try treating them like any other customer? Just a thought." She remarks before walking away, leaving David to his assumptions. He watches her leave, then shifts his gaze back to Amelia's table, his eyes narrowing. His mind is already made up. With a swift adjustment of his apron, he grabs his notepad and strides toward the table, determination and judgment etched into every step. At Amelia's table, laughter and light-hearted conversation fill the air. The children are engrossed in their menus, their excitement evident. David approaches, his expression neutral, but his tone carrying a subtle edge. "Good evening, ladies. Welcome to Bella Cucina. I'll be your waiter tonight. May I start you off with some drinks?" His voice is polite, but something about his delivery feels off. The table quiets as Amelia looks up, her warm smile unwavering. "Yes, thank you. We'll take a few lemonades for the kids," and David interrupts, his tight smile never reaching his eyes. "Perhaps something more refined? We have an excellent selection of wines." His suggestion, though framed as helpful, drips with condescension. Amelia pauses, her smile faltering for a moment. The other women exchange quick, uneasy glances, sensing the undertone in his words. "Lemonades for the kids," Amelia replies firmly, her calm demeanor intact. "And for the adults, we'll take a bottle of your house red." David jots it down briskly, his nod perfunctory. "Very well. I'll be back shortly," he states before turning sharply and walking away. The tension lingers in his absence. One of the children, Lucas, tugs on Amelia's sleeve, his young voice tinged with concern. "Mom, is that man mad at us?" he whispers. Amelia softens, gently patting his hand. "No, honey. He's just busy," she assures him, though her gaze lingers on David's retreating figure. She exchanges a knowing look with the women at the table, her composed exterior concealing a simmering unease. David returns to the service station, his posture rigid as he prepares the group's drink order. His movements are sharp, almost mechanical, as if he's rushing through the task just to get it over with. Maria watches him from a distance, concern etched across her face. She knows David's mood, and she knows where this is heading. She steps closer but decides to hold back, hoping things won't spiral. At the table, the women continue their conversation, doing their best to brush off David's earlier behavior. Amelia, ever the calm leader, directs the discussion back to their celebration, a birthday for one of the children, Kiana, who beams as the adults sing her praises. Despite the tension, the group laughs, filling the space with warmth. David approaches with a tray of drinks, his forced smile barely concealing his irritation. He places the lemonades in front of the children, then sets the bottle of red wine down with a little too much force, causing the glasses to clink loudly. Amelia notices, but says nothing, choosing to maintain her composure. "Here you go," David says, his tone clipped. "Anything else before I take your food order?" His eyes sweep across the table, not really looking at anyone, his detachment obvious. Amelia exchanges a quick glance with one of the women, Cheryl, before responding. "Yes, could we get a few extra napkins and some bread for the table, please?" Her request is simple, her tone polite. David sighs, a quiet but deliberate exhale, before jotting it down. "Sure. Anything else?" His words are civil, but his delivery suggests he's already exasperated. Kiana, the birthday girl, pipes up with a wide smile. "Do you have any special desserts for birthdays?" Her voice is innocent, filled with excitement. David hesitates for a moment, glancing at Kiana with a forced smile. "We have a dessert menu. You can look there," he replies curtly. He turns back to Amelia. "Ready to order now?" Amelia, sensing his growing impatience, stays calm. "Yes, we are," she begins, but just as she starts listing their choices, David interrupts again. "Actually," he says, raising a hand, "I'll just come back when you're done deciding. Seems like there's still a lot of talking." Without waiting for a response, he turns and walks away. The table falls silent for a beat, the atmosphere now thick with discomfort. Kiana looks confused, while the adults exchange uneasy glances. Cheryl leans toward Amelia, her voice low but firm. "We don't have to stay here. There are other places." Amelia shakes her head slightly. "No, we're staying. We have every right to be here, just like anyone else." Her voice is steady, but there's a flicker of resolve in her eyes, a quiet refusal to be pushed out. Maria, observing from a distance, bites her lip in frustration. She moves toward David, who's now at the bar, tapping his pen against the counter impatiently. "David," she hisses, pulling him aside. "What's your problem? You're being rude, and it's obvious." David shrugs, his expression indifferent. "I'm just doing my job." "No, you're not," Maria fires back. "You're making it personal, and they can feel it. We can all feel it." David stiffens, but doesn't respond. Instead, he grabs a basket of bread and a handful of napkins, heading back to the table. His face is set, his pride preventing any acknowledgement of Maria's words. Back at the table, Amelia straightens, preparing for his return. She's determined not to let his attitude ruin their night, but the tension is becoming harder to ignore. David strides back to the table with the basket of bread and napkins in hand, his expression void of warmth. He sets the bread down with a thud, his movements brisk, almost dismissive. He hands the napkins to Amelia without making eye contact. "Here's your bread and napkins," he says flatly. His voice is devoid of the usual hospitality tone, more mechanical than genuine. Amelia accepts the napkins, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "Thank you," she responds, her tone polite but firm. She refuses to let his demeanor rattle her, though her patience is wearing thin. David lingers a second longer than necessary, his eyes briefly scanning the table. "Are we ready to order now, or should I come back later?" he asks, the question laced with impatience. Amelia, sensing the growing tension, nods. "We're ready." She takes a deep breath and begins listing the orders, taking her time to ensure everything is correct. The other women chime in occasionally, clarifying their preferences. Throughout the process, David jots down notes, his pen moving quickly, but his irritation is barely concealed. As they finish, Cheryl notices a slight smirk on David's face when one of the children mispronounces a dish. Her eyes narrow. "Is there something funny?" she asks pointedly, her voice cutting through the air. David looks up, startled by her directness. "Excuse me?" he replies, his expression shifting to one of feigned confusion. Cheryl doesn't back down. "You're smiling like something's amusing. I just want to make sure everything's clear so there aren't any misunderstandings." Her words hang heavily, her meaning unmistakable. There's a pause, the air thick with unspoken words. David's smile vanishes. "Everything's clear," he mutters, closing his notepad. "I'll get your order in." Without another word, he turns and walks away, his back stiff. The table remains silent for a moment after his departure. Tanya, one of the women, leans in, her voice low. "This is getting ridiculous. We don't have to put up with this." Amelia nods thoughtfully, but keeps her tone measured. We'll see how the rest of the night goes. Let's not let him ruin our evening. Her voice is calm, but there's a steely resolve beneath it. She's not just enduring this for herself, she's setting an example for the children. Meanwhile, back at the service station, Maria confronts David again. Her frustration is evident in her furrowed brow and crossed arms. You need to cut it out, she snaps. This isn't about you. David looks at her, defensive. I'm just handling it how I handle every table. No, you're not, Maria fires back. You're being rude, dismissive, and everyone can see it. Do you think they don't notice? Do you think the kids don't notice? David hesitates, his expression hardening. I'm doing my job. He insists, though his voice lacks conviction. Maria shakes her head, stepping closer. If this blows up, it's on you, not them. You. David says nothing, his jaw tight. After a moment, Maria walks away, leaving him standing there, tension radiating from him. He glances over at Amelia's table again, his eyes narrowing. Something about their calm resilience gnaws at him, but he can't admit it, at least not yet. David stands at the service station, watching Amelia's table from a distance. His fingers tap against the countertop, his expression tense. Despite Maria's warning, he's unwilling to let go of his prejudice. He grabs the food trays, determined to push through the rest of the evening without acknowledging his behavior. At the table, the atmosphere is strained but not broken. Amelia leads the conversation, her voice light, steering the group back into comfortable territory. The children giggle softly, their joy untainted by the underlying tension. The women exchange supportive glances, silently agreeing to keep the evening pleasant for the kids. David approaches with the trays, setting the plates down with mechanical precision. Your food, he announces curtly, his tone devoid of warmth. He doesn't bother describing the dishes or making small talk as he would with other tables. Instead, he moves quickly, eager to leave. Amelia watches him carefully, her eyes steady. She thanks him as he places her plate in front of her. Everything looks great, she says, her voice calm but firm, hoping to diffuse the situation. The rest of the table follows suit, offering polite acknowledgments despite David's demeanor. Just as David is about to leave, Kiana, the birthday girl, speaks up. Excuse me, sir, she says, her voice bright and innocent. Do you have candles for my birthday dessert? David pauses, his grip tightening on the tray. He forces a smile, though it barely conceals his irritation. I'll check, he replies tersely, turning away before she can say anything else. As he walks back toward the kitchen, Maria intercepts him, her arms crossed. David, what is wrong with you? She demands. You can't even be polite to a kid. David sighs, clearly fed up. Look, they're pushing my buttons. I'm trying to get through this. Maria shakes her head, her frustration evident. They're not pushing your buttons. You walked in with them already pressed. You need to fix this before it gets worse. David glares at her, unwilling to admit she's right. Without responding, he heads into the kitchen, leaving Maria standing there, exasperated. The women exchange concerned glances after David's abrupt departure. Cheryl leans in, her voice low but urgent. This isn't just bad service. This is something else. Amelia nods, her expression thoughtful. I know, but let's not give him the reaction he's looking for. We'll get through this. Tanya sighs. It's hard to sit here and take it, especially in front of the kids. I know, Amelia replies softly, but we're showing them something important, how to handle this with dignity. They're watching us. Kiana looks up at her mother, her big eyes curious. Mom, is everything okay? She asks. Amelia smiles warmly, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. Everything's fine, sweetheart. We're here to celebrate your special day. The reassurance settles the children, but the adults remain tense. They continue eating, determined to make the best of the evening, though the weight of the situation lingers over the table like an unspoken truth. David returns from the kitchen with a small plate of cake topped with a single candle. His steps are brisk, his expression stiff. As he approaches, Kiana's face lights up. My birthday cake, she squeals with excitement, her joy cutting through the lingering tension. David places the plate in front of Kiana and, with a flick of his lighter, lights the candle. There you go, he mutters, stepping back, arms crossed. Amelia smiles gently at Kiana. Make a wish, sweetheart, she encourages. Kiana closes her eyes, makes her wish, and blows out the candle. The table claps lightly, but David remains motionless, his disapproval thinly veiled. Thank you, sir, Kiana says with innocence and enthusiasm. David forces a smile but lingers. Next time, let us know ahead if it's a birthday, he says flatly. We don't usually do this last minute. The joy at the table evaporates. Amelia stays calm. We appreciate the effort, she replies, her tone even. Cheryl isn't as restrained. Is there a problem? She asks, her eyes narrowing. David shrugs. No problem. Just saying we have policies. Maria rushes over, sensing the tension. Her smile is apologetic. I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding, she says, turning to David with a firm tone. I'll handle it from here. David hesitates, then nods and walks off. Maria turns back to the table. If you need anything else, please let me know. Amelia smiles warmly. Thank you. Maria winks at Kiana. Happy birthday! As the group relaxes, Cheryl leans into Amelia. That guy's got issues. Amelia nods. But he's not ruining this. Let's focus on Kiana. Across the room, David watches, his pride bruised and his resentment simmering. The dinner continues with a strained calm. The women try to focus on Kiana, who is happily picking at her cake, but David's behavior hangs over the table like a storm cloud. Amelia keeps her smile intact, but the tension is undeniable. David watches from the service station, his eyes tracking every movement at the table. He clenches his jaw as he observes the laughter, the small moments of joy between the women and children. It grates against him. After a few minutes, David approaches again, this time without the tray. He pauses just out of earshot of the table, scanning the room for any excuse to interrupt. Finally, he walks over, leaning down slightly to address Amelia directly. Everything okay? He asks, his tone too casual, too pointed. Amelia looks up, her expression composed. Yes, everything is fine, she says, her voice steady. She doesn't invite conversation, but David presses on. I noticed you haven't touched your wine, he remarks, gesturing to the half-empty bottle. Not a fan of the house red? His words are tinged with judgment, as if he's implying they don't belong in a place like this. Amelia raises an eyebrow, unfazed. It's lovely, thank you, she responds, her politeness thin but firm. David's smile falters for a moment, his discomfort rising. Good, good. He straightens up, his eyes flicking briefly to the children before he clears his throat. Let me know if you need anything else. Before he can walk away, Cheryl stands up abruptly. Her chair scrapes against the floor as she moves, a purposeful step toward David. Actually, she says, her voice cutting through the silence, we do need something. David turns, surprised by her directness. What's that? Cheryl steps closer, her tone even but firm. An apology. You've been rude to us all night, and we've had enough. We're paying customers, and we deserve respect. The room falls still. Amelia's gaze sharpens, and the other women exchange looks, but none of them say a word. David, caught off guard, opens his mouth to respond but hesitates. His bravado falters. I wasn't, he begins, but Cheryl interrupts, her voice rising slightly. You were. We've been nothing but polite to you, and you've treated us like we don't belong here. David's face flushes, his defenses crumbling. For a moment, there's nothing but silence between them. He glances around the room, noticing the attention from nearby diners. He finally looks back at Cheryl, his voice quieter, defensive. Fine, I'm sorry, but you have to understand, Amelia stands up then, her presence commanding. We don't need excuses, David. Just respect, that's all. Her voice is calm, but her authority cuts through the tension like a knife. David doesn't respond. He turns and walks away without another word, disappearing behind the service station. As he goes, the women exchange looks of quiet relief, though the air is still thick with the remnants of the confrontation. Amelia sits back down, offering Kiana a smile. Don't worry, sweetheart, she says softly. It's your special day, and we're going to enjoy it. The group settles into a more genuine comfort, though the night's tension lingers in the background. The atmosphere at the table has finally relaxed, but an underlying tension still hums in the air. The group is finishing their meal, conversation flowing more naturally now that the confrontation is over. Kiana, oblivious to the earlier drama, continues to enjoy her cake, her small giggles filling the space with warmth. Maria walks by, and noticing the calm at the table, she smiles. How's everything going now? She asks, leaning against the nearby counter. Amelia offers a polite smile. Much better. Thank you for your help. Maria nods, but then her expression shifts slightly. She looks toward the kitchen, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. You know, David's usually not like this. I've never seen him so off. Amelia raises an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. Really? He's been nothing but rude tonight. Maria hesitates, her gaze still on the kitchen. I don't know what's going on with him, but there's something you should know. The group goes quiet, sensing the weight in her words. What's that? Cheryl asks, her tone wary. Maria takes a deep breath. David, he doesn't like it when things challenge his view of things, and he's had a rough time lately. I'm not defending his actions, but he's going through something. Maybe it's affecting his behavior. Amelia's expression softens slightly, but there's no forgiveness in her eyes. That doesn't excuse the way he treated us. No, it doesn't, Maria agrees quickly. But I think it's important to understand where it's coming from. Before anyone can respond, David appears at the service station, walking towards the table with his head low. His posture is stiff, and there's a slight wariness in his movements. He stops a few feet away, hesitating. Maria looks up at him and then back to the table, signaling for them to remain calm. David stands there for a moment, the silence hanging in the air. Finally, he clears his throat. I owe you an apology, he says, his voice reluctant but sincere. The table goes still. Amelia's the first to speak, her tone cool but measured. You're right. You do. David nods slowly, his gaze meeting Amelia's. I shouldn't have treated you like that. I let my own stuff get in the way. I'm sorry. There's a long pause before Cheryl, to everyone's surprise, speaks up. Apology accepted, she says, her voice calm but firm. But it's going to take more than words to fix the way you treated us tonight. David looks at her, his eyes searching for some indication that she's mocking him, but there's nothing but sincerity in her tone. He nods again, looking down. I'll do better, he says quietly. Maria watches the exchange with a mix of relief and caution. She walks over, giving David a gentle nudge. You don't have to like everyone, but you do need to respect them, she says softly, more to him than anyone else. David doesn't respond, but his posture loosens and he walks away, leaving the group with a strange mixture of resolution and unanswered questions. The women watch him go, and for a moment, no one speaks. Finally, Amelia exhales slowly, looking around at her friends and their children. Let's not dwell on it anymore, she says with a soft smile. We're here for Kiana, and that's what matters. The group nods in agreement, their earlier discomfort easing. Kiana, oblivious to the grown-up tensions, jumps up from her seat. I want to go play, she announces excitedly. Amelia laughs and nods. Go ahead, sweetheart. Enjoy your night. As Kiana rushes off to the nearby play area, the women relax, the night's events fading into the background. David, in the meantime, watches from the service station, a shadow of regret crossing his face. He has more to learn, but for now, he's left to stew in his own thoughts as the restaurant continues to hum with life. As the evening winds down, Amelia and her group are more relaxed, chatting and laughing. Kiana, still energetic, plays in the nearby area, her giggles light in the background. Amelia smiles at her daughter, then turns to her friends. I can't believe how fast she's growing, she says with a sigh. Cheryl nods, smiling. Feels like just yesterday she was a toddler. The mood is light, but a loud crash from the kitchen suddenly breaks the calm. David emerges from the kitchen, visibly frustrated, holding a dish in one hand, his posture tense. Maria follows close behind, looking worried. David, what happened? She asks. David places the dish on the counter with a clatter. I've had enough of this place, he mutters under his breath, his voice tinged with anger. Maria, concerned, steps closer. What's going on? What are you talking about? David's voice rises. They come in here, treat me like crap, and I'm supposed to just smile and serve them? I'm done. Amelia stands up, her tone firm. David, calm down. This isn't the way to handle it. David snaps back, his frustration clear. You think I need to calm down? I'm not some servant. Cheryl stands too, her voice sharp. You've been rude to us all night. We didn't deserve that. David glares at her, fists clenched. He opens his mouth to retort but stops, his anger fading slightly. Amelia steps forward, her voice calm but direct. If you can't respect us, you don't belong here. David looks at her, his face tense, then turns away, muttering, Maybe I need a break. Maria steps in, her tone softer. Maybe that's a good idea. Take a step back, David. David doesn't respond. He walks into the staff room, leaving the tension behind him. The women are silent for a moment, the weight of the confrontation lingering. Amelia exhales, her expression thoughtful. He's got to figure it out. Kiana, oblivious to the drama, runs back to the table. Can we go home now, Mommy? Amelia smiles. Yes, sweetheart. Let's go. As they gather their things and head for the door, David is seen sitting in the staff room, head in his hands, still lost in his frustration. The group steps out into the night, leaving the restaurant behind. The night has cooled, and the streetlights cast a soft glow as the group steps outside the restaurant. The evening air is crisp, but the tension from inside lingers. Amelia, Cheryl, and Maria walk side by side, their steps slow and thoughtful. Kiana, skipping along beside them, is excited to leave but senses something is different. Mommy, can we come back here again? Kiana asks innocently, looking up at Amelia. Amelia smiles softly, though there's a faint edge to her voice. We'll see, sweetie. We'll see. The group falls into a reflective silence, the night unusually quiet around them. Cheryl is the first to break it. I still can't believe he acted like that. I thought maybe things were better when he apologized, but now? I don't know. I don't think he's really changed. Maria nods beside her. It's more than just a bad night. I've known David for years, and I've never seen him like this. I think something's off with him, but I can't excuse how he treated you all tonight. Amelia exhales slowly, glancing back toward the restaurant. It's like he doesn't get it. You can't just treat people however you want because you're having a bad day. I get that he's struggling, but that's not an excuse to be cruel. Cheryl shakes her head. No, it's not. People like that think they can act however they want and then apologize and everything's fine. But it's not. I'm not about to let him get away with it. Maria falls quiet, looking thoughtful. She watches the group, her voice soft when she speaks. Maybe it's not about forgiving him right now. Maybe it's about letting him know that this isn't acceptable, not letting him think he can treat people like this and walk away without consequences. Amelia stops walking for a moment, her mind clearly turning over the idea. She glances at Kiana, who is laughing in the distance, completely unaware of the weight of the situation. What would you do? Amelia asks Maria quietly. Maria shrugs slightly. I'm not sure, but if it were me, I wouldn't come back here unless things changed. And I would let David know exactly why. Amelia looks back toward the restaurant, her eyes narrowing with a quiet resolve. I think that's what I need to do. They continue walking, the sound of their footsteps the only thing breaking the night's silence. Kiana runs ahead, her excitement contagious. When they reach the car, Amelia pauses before getting in. She looks over at her friends, her expression hardening with determination. Tomorrow, I'm going back. I'm going to talk to him. I need him to understand. Cheryl looks at her for a moment, then nods slowly. You're right. He needs to know that what he did is not okay. Maria gives a small nod as well. I'll back you up, Amelia, but this has to be something you do. You've got to make him see. Amelia takes a deep breath, then smiles at Kiana, who is tugging at her sleeve, ready to go home. She opens the car door and looks back one last time at the restaurant, feeling the weight of the decision. I will, she says quietly, more to herself than anyone else. The car doors close with a soft click, and as the engine starts, the group drives off into the night, leaving the restaurant and the unresolved tension behind. The morning light spills into the quiet streets as Amelia, Cheryl, and Maria approach the restaurant. The air is fresh, the calmness of the morning contrasting sharply with the intensity of the events from the previous evening. Amelia's steps are deliberate, her thoughts racing. She knows what she has to do, but the weight of it feels heavier now that she's standing in front of the restaurant, ready to face David. Are you sure about this? Cheryl asks, her voice hesitant but supportive. Amelia takes a deep breath and nods. I have to. He needs to understand that this isn't just about last night. It's about respect. It's about who he wants to be. Maria stands beside her, offering a quiet but steady presence. You're doing the right thing, but it's not going to be easy. Amelia smiles at her, though the nerves are evident in her eyes. I know, but sometimes the hard things are the ones that matter most. They walk up to the door, and Amelia pauses for a moment, glancing at her friends. With a quiet nod, she pushes the door open, and the soft jingle of the bell above dulls the space. The restaurant is empty, save for a few staff members preparing for the lunch rush. David is at the counter, his back to them as he sorts through some paperwork. He doesn't hear them approach, and for a moment, everything feels frozen. The room, the moment, everything hangs in the balance. Amelia clears her throat. David doesn't react, still focused on his work. She steps closer, and this time, his posture stiffens. Slowly, he turns around, his eyes meeting hers. There's an instant recognition in his gaze, and the tension in the room thickens. Amelia, he says, his voice cautious but not hostile. I didn't expect you to come back. Amelia's voice is steady as she speaks, though there's an edge to it now. I didn't expect to be treated the way I was last night, David. You humiliated us, me, Cheryl, and the kids. That's not just rude, it's wrong. David runs a hand through his hair, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. I wasn't thinking straight. I was angry, and I let it get to me. I didn't mean what I said. Amelia holds his gaze, not backing down. You may not have meant it, but that doesn't change the fact that you did it. You hurt us, and what bothers me even more is that you don't seem to understand how deep it goes. David shifts uncomfortably, his eyes flickering to the floor for a moment. I'm not proud of how I acted. I know it wasn't right. Then why didn't you stop yourself? Amelia presses, her voice unwavering. Why did you keep going when you knew it was wrong? David looks up at her, his expression conflicted. Because I was frustrated. I've been dealing with a lot, things that have nothing to do with you or your group, but I took it out on you and I'm sorry. Amelia steps closer, her voice softer now, but still firm. David, we all have bad days, but we don't treat people like that just because we're angry. And if you can't learn to control that, then maybe you shouldn't be here at all. His jaw clenches, but he doesn't argue. I get it. I've been a jerk, and I don't know how to fix it. Amelia takes another step forward, her tone resolute. You start by owning it. You start by understanding that this kind of behavior isn't just a mistake. It's a choice, and you have to choose to do better. David exhales slowly, the weight of her words settling on him. He nods, though the remorse is still evident in his eyes. I'll do better. I promise. For a long moment, there's silence between them, the words hanging in the air. Amelia studies him, unsure whether to believe him, but knowing that his willingness to face the consequences is the first step. Finally, Cheryl speaks up from behind her, her voice calm but still firm. We'll see, David. Actions speak louder than words. Amelia turns toward Cheryl, her expression thoughtful. She nods. Yes, we'll see. With one last look at David, Amelia turns to leave. She doesn't want to stay any longer, not until she sees a real change. Maria and Cheryl follow her, and as they exit the restaurant, the door closes softly behind them, leaving the moment to linger in the quiet aftermath. As they step outside into the fresh air, Amelia exhales deeply, the tension slowly fading from her shoulders. The confrontation is over, but it's far from finished. She doesn't know if David will change, but she knows she did what was right. We did it, Maria says, her voice a mix of relief and support. Amelia nods, a small smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, now it's up to him. The three women walk down the street, the city around them alive and bustling. But in this moment, there's peace. At least for now. The following day, the atmosphere in the restaurant is noticeably different. David is there early, setting up for the lunch rush, but there's a quiet energy about him, less of the usual edge, more introspection. He moves slower than usual, his mind clearly elsewhere. The events of last night hang heavy in the air, and he's left alone with his thoughts. In the back, Maria and the other staff are preparing for the day's orders. They glance over at David now and then, their faces reflecting the uncertainty about what's to come. Everyone's aware that something needs to change, but no one knows exactly what that will look like. Amelia, Cheryl, and Maria arrive at the restaurant, but today, it's different. There's a sense of caution in their steps. It's not about confrontation anymore, but a quiet hope that things will have shifted. As they enter, they notice the change in the atmosphere almost immediately. David looks up from the counter as they walk in. His eyes meet Amelia's, and for the first time in a while, he doesn't look defensive. There's an acknowledgement, but no words yet. Amelia, still guarded, steps forward, but doesn't immediately speak. She simply observes him, taking in the subtle difference in his demeanor. Cheryl, always the one to break the silence, speaks up first. You look like you've been thinking about things, she says, her tone neutral but not unkind. David looks at her and then at the others, before nodding slowly. I have been. I've been thinking a lot about last night, and I've realized that I've been a jerk. And it's time I start acting like I'm not. Amelia studies him for a moment before answering. We're glad to hear that, David. But it's not just about saying the words. It's about showing it. And you need to prove that this isn't just an apology for the sake of getting past it. David nods again, more firmly this time. I get it. I will. I'm not going to pretend like I can undo everything I've done, but I can do better. Maria, who's been quiet, steps in, her voice calm but resolute. Actions are everything. We can't just go back to how things were before. You need to prove you're serious about this change. David takes a deep breath, the weight of her words settling in. He looks around, almost as if searching for something. I know. I just want to make things right. If you'll give me a chance, I'll show you. Amelia glances at Cheryl and Maria, who give her a silent nod of support. They understand that it's going to take time, but the sincerity in David's voice is undeniable. For the first time, there's hope that this might lead somewhere. I'm willing to give you a chance, Amelia says finally. But it's on you to prove it, starting with today. David nods, and the room grows quiet for a moment, the air thick with the unspoken promise of change. It's not going to be easy, but for the first time, it feels like it's possible. As the lunch rush begins, David takes his place behind the counter, moving with purpose. The staff shifts into gear, the restaurant filling with the sounds of plates clattering, conversations buzzing, and the familiar hum of a busy day. Amelia, Cheryl, and Maria stay for a while, watching as David works. He's different today, more focused, more patient. When he serves their table, his tone is respectful, and his interactions are sincere. It's not perfect, but it's a start. As they finish their meals and prepare to leave, Amelia feels a cautious optimism stirring. She's not sure yet if things will truly change, but for the first time, there's a glimmer of hope that David is ready to try. Do you think he'll really change? Cheryl asks quietly as they stand to leave. Amelia looks toward the counter where David is working, his demeanor calmer than it's been in weeks. I think he's trying, and that's the first step. They walk out together, the door jingling softly behind them. The restaurant is quieter now, but there's an unspoken sense of possibility hanging in the air. It's not over yet, but maybe, just maybe, they're starting to turn a corner. The following day, there's a noticeable change in the restaurant's atmosphere. David is quieter, more focused, and trying to manage his duties without the usual tension. Amelia, Cheryl, and Maria sit at a table, observing him carefully. They haven't let their guard down, but the subtle difference in David's demeanor doesn't go unnoticed. During the busy lunch rush, a new group enters, 3 black women and a young child. David, still working with more restraint, leads them to their table. As he hands out menus, he's brief and stiff, but there's no hostility in his actions. As he leaves the table, he lingers for a second longer than necessary, glancing at the child with a visible discomfort that he quickly masks. The woman at the table notices and speaks up when David returns with their drinks. "Excuse me," she says, her voice firm but calm. "I noticed the way you looked at my daughter. Is there a problem?" David freezes, his mind racing. Amelia from the corner watches with growing concern. David swallows hard, finally responding. "No, there's no problem. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable." The woman nods. "Thank you. Just making sure we're all on the same page." David quickly retreats to the back, his nerves visible. Amelia watches him for a moment before turning back to her table, but her mind lingers on the interaction. Later, when the rush dies down, Amelia approaches David at the counter. "You handled that well," she says, her tone neutral. David glances up, exhausted. "I tried. I don't know if it was enough, but I tried." Amelia meets his gaze, unwavering. "It's a start, but people will keep testing you." David's shoulders slump slightly. "I know. I'm trying to be better, but it's hard." Amelia's voice softens, but there's still firmness in her words. "It's supposed to be hard, but if you want this to matter, you have to keep going. No turning back." David nods, and Amelia steps away, leaving him with a lingering sense of responsibility. As she exits the restaurant with her friends, David watches them leave, silently reaffirming his commitment to change. A week has passed since the confrontation with the group of black women, and David has been trying to show change. He's quieter, more patient, but the tension in the restaurant still lingers. The staff watches him closely, unsure if the changes are genuine or just temporary. It's a busy Wednesday when Greg, a regular customer known for being outspoken, walks in. He's noticed something different about David and wastes no time in pointing it out. "Hey, you all right?" Greg asks as David leads him to his table. "You seem off today." David forces a smile. "I'm fine, just a busy day." Greg, however, isn't convinced. "You sure? You look stressed." David stiffens but keeps his tone polite. Just a lot going on. I'll bring your order right out. As David heads back to the kitchen, the pressure builds. It's hard to focus with Greg's prying questions and the weight of his past actions hanging over him. When he returns to deliver Greg's order, the man doesn't back down. You seem like you've got something on your mind, Greg presses. You sure everything's all right? David snaps, his frustration spilling out. What's the deal, Greg? You've been coming here for years, and now you act like I'm doing something wrong? Greg holds up a hand. I didn't mean anything by it, kid. Just thought you might need to talk about it. David turns away quickly, feeling exposed. He heads into the kitchen, struggling to keep his composure. Maria and Cheryl are watching, sensing something's off. You okay? Maria asks softly. David exhales. I'm fine. Just a lot to handle. Cheryl adds, You don't have to do it alone, you know? We're here. David nods, but feels the weight of their concern. As he walks back to Greg's table to deliver the check, he's careful to keep his tone calm. I'm sorry about earlier, David says. I didn't mean to snap at you. Greg shrugs, his voice softer now. It's all right, kid. Just don't let it eat you up. You're doing fine. David looks at him for a moment, surprised by the kindness. Thanks, Greg. After Greg leaves, David stands still for a moment, feeling the pressure lift slightly. He turns back to the kitchen, where Maria and Cheryl are waiting. I think I'll be okay, David says quietly. Maria smiles gently. One step at a time, David. David nods, feeling like he's made a small but significant step forward. The restaurant is quieter than usual the next day. David is moving through his routine, wiping tables, checking in with customers, but there's a sense of purpose in his movements that wasn't there before. The guilt still lingers, but it's mixed with a quiet determination. Amelia approaches him, noticing his quieter demeanor. You've been a bit off, she observes, her tone gentle. David looks up, his mind still preoccupied. I've been thinking a lot, trying to make things right. I don't know if I can fix everything, but I'm trying. Amelia nods thoughtfully. It's not just about doing better, David. It's about understanding why you need to change and facing what you've done. David stops for a moment, considering her words. I've been avoiding that, worrying more about people's judgment than actually looking at myself. She gives a small, knowing smile. It's hard, but it's the only way to really change. Before David can respond, Maria steps in. You're doing the work, David. We see it, even if it's not perfect. David nods, a lump in his throat. I don't want to be that person anymore. I'm trying to be better. Cheryl joins them, adding, You will be. Progress is what matters, not perfection. David exhales deeply, feeling a new sense of resolve. It's a long journey ahead, but with their support, maybe he doesn't have to do it alone. As the lunch rush begins, David heads back to work, his steps more confident than before. The dinner rush is in full swing, and the noise of the busy restaurant fills the air. David is moving swiftly between tables, his movements smoother now, his demeanor calmer. He's been trying, really trying, to make things right, but the weight of his past mistakes still hangs over him. As he approaches a table near the back, his eyes catch a familiar group, the same black women and child he humiliated before. They've returned. David freezes for a moment, panic rising. His first instinct is to turn away, to pretend he didn't see them. But he can't. Not now. Taking a deep breath, he walks up to their table, forcing a smile. Good evening. How are you tonight? The woman looks up, her expression neutral. She doesn't seem angry, but there's a cool distance in her eyes. We're fine, she replies, her tone polite but reserved. We'll be ready to order soon. David nods, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Take your time. I'll be right here. As he walks away, he can feel the eyes of his coworkers on him, waiting to see if he can handle this moment. He feels the pressure, but he knows this is his chance to show he's changed. A few minutes later, the woman waves him over. David walks back, trying to steady his nerves. What can I get for you? He asks, keeping his voice calm. She gives him their order. David repeats it back, confirming the details. It's a simple exchange, but for David, it's everything. This is his opportunity to make up for his past actions. When the food is ready, David carries it to their table, his heart pounding. He sets the plates down carefully, trying to keep his hands steady. I hope everything is to your liking. The woman looks up at him, her expression still unreadable. For a moment, there's silence. Then she simply nods. It's fine. Thank you. David exhales, his shoulders tense. It wasn't the grand apology he wanted to give, but it was something. She didn't reject him outright. As he walks away, he feels a sense of relief wash over him, even if it's small. His coworkers are watching, but no one says anything. They know this is just a step in a much longer journey. David heads back to the kitchen, his heart still racing, but he's learning. This wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The next day, the restaurant is quieter than usual. The lunch rush has just ended, and there's a calm lull in the air. David is sitting in the break room, his mind still processing the events from the night before. The woman and her group hadn't rejected him, but they hadn't fully accepted him either. It felt like a tentative step forward, but he still wasn't sure if he had truly earned their forgiveness. David runs his fingers through his hair, feeling the weight of his internal conflict. He knows change doesn't happen overnight, but a part of him still wants to see immediate results. He wants to know that the people he's wronged can truly see that he's trying. Just as he's lost in thought, Maria walks in, carrying a tray of coffee. She sets it down in front of him with a knowing smile. "You've been quiet today," she says, her tone light but not dismissive. "Thinking about last night?" David nods, his gaze fixed on the coffee. "Yeah, I don't know if I did enough. They didn't exactly welcome me with open arms." Maria sits across from him, her expression soft. "You don't need them to welcome you with open arms, David. It's not about that. It's about showing up, being accountable. You did that." David sighs, leaning back in his chair. "I know, but it's hard. I don't know if they believe me yet." Maria reaches across the table, then placing a hand on his. "It's not about what they believe right now. It's about what you believe. Do you believe you can change?" David looks at her words cutting through the uncertainty swirling in his mind. "I don't know. I want to. But it feels like such a long road." She nods. "It is. But you're on it, and that's what matters." Just then, Cheryl enters the break room, holding a pile of napkins and a menu. She catches the tail end of the conversation and chimes in. "Change takes time, and it doesn't always look the way we expect, but you're doing it. That's enough for now," Cheryl says with a grin. David smiles weakly. "Thanks. I guess I just need to keep going." Maria gives him a reassuring look. "One step at a time, David. One step at a time." The conversation is interrupted by the sound of the restaurant bell ringing as a customer enters. David stands up, ready to get back to work. But as he heads for the door, he feels a flicker of hope. It's not much, but it's something. Maybe, just maybe, he's on the right path. As he steps back into the dining room, he notices the same woman and her group sitting at a table in the corner, quietly eating their meal. This time, their eyes don't feel as distant. There's a brief moment of eye contact between him and the woman, and for the first time, it doesn't feel like judgment. David keeps walking, his heart still heavy but lighter than before. He's not there yet, but for the first time in a long while, he feels like he's moving in the right direction. The restaurant is bustling with energy, the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation filling the air. David moves through the dining room with practiced ease, but today his nerves are on edge. He's been trying to make things right, but something still doesn't feel completely settled. He's been working harder, smiling more, speaking politely, being as attentive as possible. But there's always that lingering feeling that the people he's wronged are watching, waiting to see if his actions match his words. He spots the woman and her group again, sitting in the same corner booth. This time, it's not as jarring as before, but his stomach still tightens. They've returned, and he feels a mix of apprehension and hope. He's been wondering if they would, if they could forgive him for the way he treated them. David takes a deep breath, walking toward their table. He tries to keep his voice steady, his steps confident. When he reaches them, he offers a warm but restrained smile. "Good evening," he says. "How's everything going tonight?" The woman looks up at him, her expression still cautious, but there's something different this time. A subtle shift. Maybe it's the way she meets his eyes without the coldness from before. Maybe it's the way the lines of her face aren't as tense. "We're fine," she responds, her tone less guarded than it used to be. "We'll be ready to order in just a minute." David nods. "Take your time. I'll check back with you in a moment." As he walks away, he feels a quiet sense of accomplishment. It's not a warm reunion, but it's progress. He's no longer being outright ignored or dismissed, and for David, that feels like a small victory. He's not sure if they've forgiven him completely. He knows that's a long road ahead, but there's a sense of acknowledgement. And that's enough for now. David goes back to his duties, keeping his distance for a while, but his eyes keep returning to their table. There's a part of him that wants to apologize again, to say something more, but he knows it's not the right time. His actions have to do the talking now. The evening has settled into a quieter rhythm, the rush of customers slowing down. David walks through the dining room, his mind heavy. He's been reflecting on his actions, and something nags at him. He hasn't done enough. His previous gestures, while polite, didn't fully address the harm he caused. David sees the woman and her group sitting in the same corner booth, and he knows it's time. He walks over to their table, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. "Excuse me," he begins, his voice soft but steady. "I need to apologize. I realize now how wrong I was to treat you and your family the way I did. I regret it deeply." The woman looks up, her eyes wary but not hostile. The others at the table remain quiet, watching him. "I know I can't undo what I did," David continues, "but I want to be better. I'm not asking for forgiveness now, but I hope, in time, you'll see that I'm trying." The woman studies him, the silence thick. After a beat, she responds, her tone measured. "Thank you for saying that. It's not easy to admit when we're wrong, and it's not easy to trust someone who's hurt us." David nods, swallowing hard. "I understand. I'll show you, over time, that I've changed." She gives a small nod. "We'll see." David steps back, feeling a weight lifted. The apology wasn't perfect, but it was real. It's a start, and for now, that's enough. The restaurant is buzzing with the usual evening activity, the hum of conversations blending with the clatter of plates and silverware. David moves through the dining room with more confidence than before, but today there's a tension in the air. He knows he's still not fully accepted, not yet. The truth is, he's still trying to prove himself, and that's something he's learning takes time he's not sure he has. In the kitchen, Tom, a fellow waiter, leans against the counter with a smirk on his face as David walks by. Tom's always been a bit of a skeptic when it comes to change. He's noticed the difference in David's attitude lately, but Tom doesn't buy it. "Hey, David," Tom calls out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "How's the new improved you working out? You still keeping it together, or are we going to see the old David back soon?" David stops for a second, feeling his patience tested. He forces a calm smile, though his fists clench at his sides. "I'm still here, Tom," David says, keeping his tone level. "Just doing my job." Tom shrugs, unfazed. "Sure you are. Just don't expect everyone to buy into the whole 'I've changed' act. Not that fast anyway." David doesn't respond immediately. He could lash out, but he knows it's not worth it. Instead, he takes a slow breath, pushing past Tom to get back to his station. In the dining room, David spots the woman and her group again. This time, he's not as nervous as before. He goes through the motions, taking their order, being polite, but there's still something in the air, something unspoken. He knows the journey isn't over. They're still watching him, still testing his sincerity. But that's fine. He'll prove it, no matter how long it takes. As he walks past the kitchen again, Tom is watching him, a raised eyebrow in amusement. David makes eye contact with him, trying to maintain his composure. "Don't worry," David says quietly, as if the words are meant for himself. "I'm in this for the long haul." Tom doesn't respond, but David feels the weight of his words. It's not just about Tom or the woman and her group anymore. It's about proving it to himself. David knows that if he's going to change, he has to be patient, even if others aren't. And that, he realizes, might be the hardest part. It's a quieter night at the restaurant, the usual rush of customers tapering off as the evening wears on. David's mind is still on the woman and her group, who have returned for the third time this month. Though there's no overt hostility in their demeanor, David can sense the lingering distance. It's clear they're waiting to see if he's truly changed. David walks past their table, taking a moment to glance at them. The woman catches his eye, offering a small, almost imperceptible nod in return. It's not a warm greeting, but it's enough for David to feel like he's making progress. As he checks in with other tables, he notices Maria, another waiter, watching him from across the room. She's been with the restaurant longer than David and knows the ins and outs of its dynamics. She's seen him struggle, seen the way he's tried to turn things around. And tonight, she's making it clear that she's noticed. Maria walks up to David as he refills drinks at a nearby table. "Hey, David," she says casually, though her tone is soft with an underlying warmth. I just wanted to say, good job. David looks at her, confused for a moment. What do you mean? You've been handling things well, Maria continues, her voice steady. It's not easy, I know, but I see you trying, and that's more than a lot of people ever do. David feels a mix of surprise and relief. It's not the kind of praise he's used to getting, but it means more coming from someone who understands what he's been going through. He takes a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. Thanks, he says, offering a small, genuine smile. It's been hard, but I know I have to keep at it. Maria nods, giving him a supportive look. Yeah, just don't forget, you're not doing this alone. We all have our own battles. You're doing all right. David stands there for a moment, considering her words. It's a small gesture, but it's enough to remind him that he's not entirely isolated in this journey. He's not alone. Later, as he clears plates from the woman's table, he's surprised by her unexpected comment. You're doing better, she says, her voice quiet but sincere. David's heart skips a beat. He wasn't expecting this kind of acknowledgement, not so soon. He pauses, looking at her, trying to read her face. Thank you, he says, his voice soft but steady. I'm trying. She offers a brief nod, her expression still cautious, but no longer as distant. As David walks away, he feels a sense of validation, a small victory in the quiet acknowledgement of his efforts. The restaurant is quieter than usual, the hum of conversation more subdued, as if the entire space is holding its breath. David moves through the dining room, a sense of finality hanging in the air. The woman and her group have returned for what feels like the 100th time, and for the first time, David feels like he's really on the verge of something important. He walks past their table, his steps slow but purposeful. She's seated with her back to him, but she senses his presence and turns, locking eyes with him. There's no hostility in her gaze now. It's almost tentative, like she's waiting for him to do something, to prove something. David stops at their table, his heart beating a little faster than usual. He knows he's done the work. He's tried to prove himself. But this moment, this final test, feels different. It's not about what he can say anymore. It's about what he can show through actions and sincerity. Good evening, he greets, his voice calm but carrying the weight of everything he's been through. The woman nods, acknowledging his presence, but says nothing at first. For a moment, there's silence, but it's not the uncomfortable silence of their earlier encounters. It's more like a quiet understanding, a shared recognition of how far they've come from where they started. I think you've been honest with us, she says finally, her voice softer than before, though still measured. And I think you're ready. David feels a rush of emotions flood through him, but he keeps them in check. He swallows hard, unsure of what to say next, but wanting to make sure he gets this right. I've been trying, he says, his voice thick with sincerity. I know it's not enough to just say it. I've worked every day to prove it, and I'll keep working to be better. I want to earn your trust, earn your respect. She nods slowly, as if considering his words. I can see that. It's not about being perfect. It's about being real. And you've been real with us. David exhales a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The weight of her words settles over him like a blanket, comforting, yet still demanding. There's a long way to go, but for the first time, he feels like he's made it. He's on the right path. I appreciate you giving me a chance, he says quietly, his voice full of gratitude. I won't let you down. The woman's face softens just a bit. There's no grand gesture, no immediate forgiveness, but the distance between them has closed. There's an acknowledgement now, a silent understanding that he's trying and that he's ready for whatever comes next. As David walks away from their table, he feels something shift inside him, something he's been hoping for all along. Not an immediate fix, but a turning point. He's no longer trapped in his past actions. He's moving forward. And for the first time, it feels like the future is full of possibilities. The restaurant is nearly empty now, the hum of conversation a distant memory as the last few customers filter out. David stands behind the bar, wiping down the counter, the familiar motions calming his mind. He's exhausted, but the weight of the day feels lighter. For the first time in a long time, he feels like he's truly earned his place here, not just as a worker, but as someone who's trying to make things right. The woman and her group are the last ones left. They're finishing their meal, chatting quietly among themselves. As David takes a deep breath and moves toward them, he sees her glance up at him. She doesn't say anything right away, but there's a softness in her eyes, an openness that wasn't there before. She catches his gaze, and for the first time, he doesn't feel the need to rush or force words. He simply stands there for a moment, waiting. "I wanted to thank you," the woman says, her voice calm but genuine, "for being patient, for showing us that you meant it." David feels his heart flutter with hope, but he doesn't let the emotions overwhelm him. He's learned the value of patience, and he knows this moment is one he's been working toward for months. "You don't have to thank me," David replies, his voice steady. "I should have done better from the start. I'm trying now. That's all I can do." She smiles softly, nodding. "And that's what matters. It's not about being perfect. It's about being willing to grow, and you've done that." David feels a sense of warmth spread through him, the words sinking in deeper than he expected. He's come a long way from the person he used to be. He's not perfect, but he's different. And that difference is enough to make a real change. "I'm glad you gave me that chance," he says quietly, his gaze meeting hers. "I know it's not easy to trust someone who's hurt you, but I promise I won't go back to who I was." She looks at him for a moment longer, her expression still thoughtful. Then, with a small but meaningful nod, she speaks. "We'll see," she says, her tone soft but unguarded. "But you've made progress, and that's a good start." David doesn't know what else to say, so he simply nods back, offering a small but sincere smile. The weight of everything, his actions, his attempts, his growth, feels like it's finally been acknowledged. This moment, though small, feels like a victory. Not a final one, but a significant one. As he turns to walk away, David glances over his shoulder one last time. The woman and her group are finishing up their drinks, chatting amongst themselves. There's no more tension, no more distance between them. For the first time, it feels like they're just people, sitting at the same table. And David knows he's on the right path now, not just to earn their forgiveness, but to earn his own sense of peace.